deep within the lungs of the earth, where the sun is a stranger and the mud is eternal. Men found something more valuable than gold. They called it white blood, rubber, the sap that fueled the industrial world's feverish hunger. In 1900, the Amazon was the center of the universe. In the city of Manaus, rubber barons lit their cigars with $100 bills and sent their laundry to Paris. They built an opera house in the heart of a green hell, believing their monopoly was a gift from God. But nature doesn't give gifts. It only grants loans, with interest. This is the story of how a single man, a bag of stolen seeds, and a desperate empire brought the world's most profitable monopoly to its knees. Welcome to the collapsed Diaries. Manaus was a fever dream, a golden splinter in the eye of the jungle. The barons here didn't just spend money, they insulted the very concept of it. While the rest of the world struggled, the rubber elite lived in a reality where the Amazon was a mere backdrop to their opulence. They were so disconnected that they refused to wash their clothes in the muddy waters of the river. Instead, they sent their silk shirts and lace dresses 5,000 miles across the Atlantic, to be laundered in London and Paris. It was a peak of hubris that the gods of the forest would not forget. In the heart of this green hell, they built the Teatro Amazonas, a palace of marble, velvet, and gold, standing where only jaguars should roam. Every brick was imported from Europe. Every crystal in the chandeliers had crossed the ocean. They sat in red velvet seats, listening to Italian operas, while the humidity of the jungle rot seeped into the walls. They believed they had conquered the wild. They didn't realize they were simply building a more beautiful cage for their own downfall. But the white blood didn't flow for free. For every dollar the barons spent on champagne, 1,000 drops of real blood were spilled under the canopy. The rubber tappers, the seringueiros, lived in a cycle of debt and death. They were hunted like animals, forced to tap trees in the deepest, most dangerous parts of the forest. To the world, rubber was the future of tires and industry. To those in the shadows, it was a liquid curse that turned their lives into a humid, never-ending nightmare. The monopoly was absolute. Brazil controlled the rubber, and the rubber controlled the world. The barons slept soundly, convinced that the seeds of the hevea tree could never survive anywhere else. They guarded the river like a fortress, laughing at the idea that their kingdom could ever be threatened. They were the masters of the earth's most precious resource, or so they thought, as they toasted to an eternity that was about to end in a single night. Into this world of arrogance stepped a man who looked like a ghost, Henry Wickham. To the locals, he was just another eccentric botanist, a man obsessed with the flora of the Amazon. But Wickham wasn't interested in flowers. He was a biological pirate, a man sent by the British Empire to do the impossible. In 1876, he stood on the banks of the Tapajos River, watching the guards, waiting for the humidity to mask his movements. Wickham spent weeks in the undergrowth, hand-picking the finest seeds of the Hevea brasiliensis, 70,000 of them. Each one was a tiny time bomb, capable of blowing the Brazilian economy to pieces. He packed them in baskets, layering them with dried leaves, treating them with more care than a king's jewels. He knew that if he was caught, the jungle would be his grave. But the prize was too great to ignore, the destruction of a monopoly. He loaded the seeds onto a British steamship, the SS Amazonas. To the Brazilian customs officials, he claimed they were rare botanical specimens, intended for the Queen's garden. The guards, blinded by the very arrogance that defined their era, didn't bother to check. They let the ship pass. They watched as the man who was about to bankrupt their nation sailed slowly down the river and out into the open sea. It was the perfect crime, committed in broad daylight. Wickham's journey didn't end at the sea. He raced across the Atlantic, reaching the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew in London. Under the glass domes, away from the prying eyes of the world, the seeds were nurtured in a controlled clinical environment. For the first time, the secrets of the Amazon were no longer a secret. The white blood was now in the hands of the most powerful empire on earth, and they were preparing to plant a forest of their own. While the Amazon barons were drowning in champagne, a silent forest was rising on the other side of the planet. In the British colonies of Malaysia and Ceylon, the seeds stolen by Wickham had grown into millions of trees. Unlike the chaotic and dangerous Amazon, these were organized, efficient, and safe. The British didn't have to hunt for trees in a jungle hell. They had created a factory out of nature itself. The wild era of the rubber hunter was being replaced by the cold logic of the plantation. Then came the year 1910. The Asian plantations began to produce rubber at a massive scale. The cost to harvest a pound of rubber in the Amazon was high, measured in blood, distance, and danger. But in Asia, it was cheap, predictable, and plentiful. The market, once a captive of the South American jungle, suddenly found a new master. The price of white blood began to slide, and for the first time in 30 years, the barons of Manaus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the tropical rain. It wasn't a slow decline, it was a freefall. Within months, the Amazon monopoly was shattered. The world no longer needed the dangerous, expensive rubber of the deep jungle. The British plantations were flooding the market with a product that was purer and more reliable. The golden age of Manaus didn't just end, it evaporated. It left behind a city that had spent its future before it arrived, a kingdom built on a resource that was no longer theirs to control. The exodus was immediate. The laundry ships to Paris stopped sailing. The opera singers packed their bags and fled on the last steamers out, leaving their costumes to rot in the heat. The mansions were boarded up, and the marble fountains ran dry. The men who once lit cigars with fortunes were now begging for passage back to Europe. The white blood had stopped flowing, and the heart of the Amazon began to beat slower and slower until there was only silence. The Teatro Amazonas, the pride of the jungle, fell silent. The red velvet seats grew mold, and the humidity began to peel the gold leaf from the walls like dead skin. The jaguars returned to the outskirts of the city, watching from the shadows as the humans surrendered. Nature was not reclaiming the land with violence, but with a patient, suffocating silence. The palace built for European kings was now becoming a sanctuary for the very wild it tried to ignore. The Amazon rubber crash was more than a financial disaster. It was a lesson in the fragility of monopolies and the price of human arrogance. Manaus had tried to build a paradise on the suffering of the forest, believing that money could buy eternity. But in the end, the seeds of their destruction were sown by their own hand, carried away in a simple wicker basket by a man they chose to ignore, while they were blinded by their own brilliance. Today, the jungle still whispers the names of the barons who thought they were gods, but their marble palaces are mostly memories, and the white blood flows in silence across a different continent. The forest remains indifferent to the rise and fall of empires, waiting for the next man who thinks he can own the earth. For in the heart of the Amazon, the only thing that truly lasts is the silence. A silence that serves as a tombstone for an empire that forgot its place. If you walk the streets of Manaus today, you can still hear the echoes of that vanished world. The ghost of the rubber boom lingers in the crumbling plaster of the opera house, and the rusting gates of mansions that once held the wealth of kings. The world moved on, rolling on tires made of Asian rubber, leaving the Amazon to heal its own wounds in the dark. It is a haunting reminder that every boom is but a breath in the long history of the earth, and every fortune is only as permanent as the rain that washes it away. This has been another entry in the Collapsed Diaries, a reminder that the greatest empires are often built on foundations as thin as a leaf and as volatile as a drop of sap. Thank you for listening to the echoes of a world that once was. May we learn from the silence before it finds us again. Until the next diary is opened, keep watching the shadows, because history doesn't just repeat, it waits.